Hi, my name is Dr. Fab. Um, I'm here today in front of the Phoenix City Hall. And the reason why I'm here is not because I'm holding any banners today, which is something I've done every time I've come here, but I've come here for a different reason. I've come here to talk about common sense. I've come here to talk about what makes sense and what could happen if the pathway of common sense is not pursued, not just by the US government, but the rest of the world as well. It is unfortunately tragic that if a non-Muslim organization commits terrorism in any part of the world, it is next to impossible to convince the global leaders that terrorism has been committed. And we're seeing this in India. India is run by a terrorist organization called the RSS that is behind every activity of the ruling regime, every nefarious agenda of the ruling regime. And today I'm here to talk to the American people, to talk to the American leadership about why it is in the national interest of US to do the right thing, to acknowledge terrorism as terrorism, to stop neglecting it, to stop ignoring it, because you cannot glorify, you cannot sugarcoat, you cannot justify the actions of India as they're happening in Kashmir and within India itself. Every law written in the United Nations International Charter has been violated by the Indian government at the behest of a terrorist organization called RSS. Every American leader who has even 1% idea about the definition of terrorism and about how RSS performs and how RSS has been masterminding its terrorist activities within India and even outside of India will condone to what I am here for. That RSS is a designated terrorist organization, and just because it is a non-Muslim organization does not mean that it cannot commit terrorism. I wish the US government was as enthusiastic about profiling non-Muslim organizations as terrorist organizations, just like it is so enthusiastic and obsessed with profiling those organizations that are committing terrorism in the name of Islam. If Biden says that he does not condone to Islamophobia, then here's a test for you. You have this non-Muslim organization sitting in India that has been trying to control the lives of 500 million people of India and that can basically make US lose its war in Ukraine. Logistically speaking, Where is India in Ukraine? Where is your Quad ally in Ukraine? Where is your AUKUS buddy in Ukraine? When Reagan tried to end communism in the 1980s, he knew what he was doing. He knew he was going to neutralize USSR. He knew who was his ally, and he knew who was his opponent. Today, unfortunately, we are seeing corrupt congressmen like Khanna launch a campaign in the House that is going against the national interests of the American people. The war that US won against USSR in Afghanistan in the 1980s under Reagan did not happen just like that. Reagan claimed victory because he knew what he was doing. Now, I'm not a Republican. You can check my background. I've been a Democrat, and now I'm not even a Democrat. I'm a neutral person who's just trying to stand by the right thing. I'm not affiliated to any political party in US. And I'm here today not in protest, but to deliver my speech, to talk to the American people, to talk to the American leadership, and have them think about what they're doing. Where is India and Ukraine? Tell me. It's nowhere. Just like it was nowhere when US was fighting a war in Afghanistan against USSR. India was with USSR in the 1980s war of Afghanistan. And despite all the diplomatic efforts of Bill Clinton, Obama, George Bush, and Trump, and now Biden, India has decided to make its choice. And that choice is not US. That choice was, is, and will be Russia. So tell me, how is it in the national interests of the American people to support a so-called ally that has defected to the country with which the American soldiers are fighting right now in Ukraine? Where is the common sense in this? Where is the rationale in this? Oh, you like Congressman Ro Khanna so much that you're willing to go by his conflict of interest? What if he is getting paid by the RSS undercover to lobby for India in the US Congress? Will you let one congressman's conflict of interest and one congressman's nefarious, covert, illicit, unconstitutional intentions to compromise your stance in Ukraine? Could US afford to lose another war after losing so many in the last few decades? Go to a grocery store and you will find your answer. Your inflation rate has already climbed to a historically high of 9%. If you have no plans to retreat or end this war on terms of Putin, and if you want to continue to fight in Ukraine, then you have to do what Reagan did. What did Reagan do? He did what was the best in the national interests of US. He chose his allies carefully. He knew what he was doing. He did not stand by Indian atrocities in Kashmir. He did not condone to terrorism of RSS in India. He did not support the religious intolerance and the persecution of every non-Hindu of India. He knew what he was doing. And he won. He won for the American people. It was probably the last war that the American people won. Since that victory, it has been a downhill course because of congressmen like Ro Khanna, who have a conflict of interest and who are corrupt and who are not supporting the interest, the national interest of the American people. Instead of confronting India, instead of categorizing RSS as a terrorist organization, Ro Khanna had the audacity to support the ongoing genocide of every non-Hindu in his home country. 500 billion people, 500 million people is what we're talking about. It's not a small number. It's a large number. And he says that he has tried, so by trying to create a fake phobia against China. The last time I checked, the Chinese foreign minister was praising the foreign minister of India for supporting Russia and Ukraine. So where does this put the loyalty of Ro Khanna? How can you explain that by supporting India, you're trying to contain China, but at the same time you're seeing China and India get closer to each other every day due to Russian influence on India and on China? So Russia is doing whatever it could to win this war. Russia has been doing this homework for years. Putin has been preparing for this war for years. He invested in cryptocurrency so that he could get himself a bailout once the sanctions kicked in. He knew he could use oil to extort benefits out of the allies of US. Because when it comes to oil and energy, everyone has to compromise. But having said that, when it happened in the 1980s, Reagan knew who to rely on, and Reagan knew whom he had to stay away from. Unfortunately, with the Biden administration, there is so much of corruption and there is so much of conflict of interest that the US national interests have been forfeited deliberately, voluntarily, and illicitly, unconstitutionally. The Constitution of the US did not support terrorist activities of any organization, regardless of what kind of a religion it is intended to be done for or in the name of. Islam does not support terrorism. Muslims have sacrificed their lives to fight against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and we will continue to fight in this war against these terrorists. But when we see our innocent Muslim brothers getting persecuted, getting oppressed in India, in Kashmir, by a non-Muslim terrorist organization, and we see nothing, no silence. We see nothing, we see no words from the US administration. We wonder why. Why is this hypocrisy? Why is this duplicity? Where is the US law when it comes to RSS? Is Congressman Ro Khanna the law now? Is he the new US law now? Is he the new dictator of US who can decide the fate of this war and sell the American people and this country to Russia for the sake of supporting India? Could the American people allow corrupt congressmen like Ro Khanna to sell this country to Russia? Could you do that? You have a corrupt congressman who is not supporting the US Constitution, who is not following the US law, who has decided to become the law of this land, and who is selling this country and the lives of the US Marines who are fighting for the freedom of this country to Russia in Ukraine, just because he has a conflict of interest and he has sold his soul to India and its terrorist organization RSS. Will you let him get away with this? Like I said, I'm not here to protest. I'm here to talk to you. I do not want conflict with you. I want dialogue. I want to discuss. I want to talk about things. But tell me, this is not the 1980s. Things have changed. Russia has been working very hard to try to get its position back. And we all know that. It infiltrated the entire European hierarchy, the oligarchs. We know how the money flew. We know how deep this network is. And one little blunder could destroy the future of the American people. When you are at war, you need to choose your allies carefully. You cannot have an ally that is buying Russian oil in Russian money, so the money value has yet to collapse. We cannot let US have an ally that is now willing to reconcile with China because of pressure from Russia. Congressman Ro Khanna spoke that if we sanction India, we will not be able to contain China. I ask Congressman Ro Khanna to do his homework and read about what Henry Kissinger said about China. Kissinger said that US cannot have a military war with China, period. You just can't have it, and China knows that. That's why they have yet to have a direct battle with US, because they know they can't afford a war with US too. And a sensible diplomat like Henry Kissinger, who has worked on diplomacy all his life and has explicitly, categorically said that US cannot have military combat with China. How could Congressman Ro Khanna undermine this guy? He's almost 100 years old and he's still with it. He spent his whole life serving the American people. If he is saying that US cannot go to war with China, he knows what he's saying and he knows what he's doing. So just by creating this horrorful picture of China and this xenophobia, you're trying to create a case for US to support and condone to the horrors that RSS is committing in India and in Kashmir. That's against the US Constitution. If you took this matter to any court of law within the United States, I'm sure Congressman Ro Khanna will lose, because he acted against the US Constitution. He forfeited the national interests of the American people, and if US loses this war today in Ukraine, he will be held responsible because he made the US Congress make a bad choice by not sanctioning India when India has violated not just human rights of the non-Hindus of India, but Kashmiris as well, when India has forfeited every law under the UN Charter, committed heinous war atrocities. India has been written up by Amnesty International, United Nations Human Rights Commission. India has been written up by Human Rights Watch. All leading humanitarian organizations have condemned the actions of India against the non-Hindus of India and against the Kashmiri people. And if it were not for just the human rights value that the US should support the Kashmiris and the non-Hindus against RSS, then it is also for the war in Ukraine, where you can explicitly see that India has chosen Russia against US. Russia today is standing tall and firm in this war because you had a bad egg in the Pentagon. And if you did not get rid of this bad egg from the Pentagon, you're going to lose this war, just like you lost the last few decades of wars. And this is 9% inflation right now. This is going to go to 25 to 30% within the next 3 months if nothing is done about it. You need to plug the leaking holes in this war for you to be able to have a tangible victory, like you did in the 1980s. In the 1980s, Reagan knew what he was doing. My question today, before I end this dialogue and speech, is, Biden, do you really know what you're doing here? Because if you do, then you need to choose your allies wisely. And you need to confront India. You need to sanction India. You need to categorize RSS as a terrorist organization, because that is what will help US win this war against Russia and Ukraine. Bye-bye.